Vince McMahon had promised live matches that would take place in TBS studios, and this didn't happen, instead airing matches that appeared on WWF Championship Wrestling and WWF All-Star Wrestling. It wasn't until March of 1985 where McMahon would put on studio matches after Turner threatened to pull the plug and after the program was renamed to WWF Georgia Championship Wrestling, although, to be fair, these were still squash matches. To combat all this, Turner made some drastic decisions. If he couldn't kick the WWF off his own network due to a, quote, handshake agreement, then he was going to simply bring back the wrestling his core audience loved in different time slots. Turner approached Bill Watts and an offer was made to bring Mid-South Wrestling to TBS, taking a Sunday afternoon slot. And Ole Anderson began promoting Championship Wrestling from Georgia, and that promotion got affiliated with the NWA. So Turner decided to give Anderson a time slot also on Saturday mornings. Championship Wrestling from Georgia was seen as the true successor of the original GCW. The show even brought back Gordon Soley. Both Mid-South and Championship Wrestling from Georgia did better ratings than WWF World Championship Wrestling, and Vince McMahon wasn't happy with how things were turning out. McMahon thought he would completely control wrestling on cable television, but he didn't consider for a moment that Turner would simply add more shows to his network. And with the WWF losing viewership and being seen as even more cartoony in comparison to these other wrestling shows on TBS, McMahon decided to give in. All this time.
And this is really when the Monday Night War began. See the back and forth of Ted reacting to Vince and Vince reacting to Ted. This is when the Monday Night War started. Like I said earlier, this is really when we first started to see glimpses of WWF versus WCW. But this was way before that. This is when the war really began. But let's get back to it. Let's see who came to the ring. To the locker room. Laverne, salute to you. Welcome to the locker room. Appreciate you coming out. Yeah, Vince was definitely ready to play Derek once he don't get his way. I remember having to choose which to watch sometimes. Yeah, that's how it was with WCW, WWE in the 90s. But let's continue on and let's see this as this story definitely unfold some more.
Anderson began promoting Championship Wrestling from Georgia, and that promotion got affiliated with the NWA. So Turner decided to give Anderson a time slot also on Saturday mornings. Championship Wrestling from Georgia was seen as the true successor of the original GCW. The show even brought back Gordon Soley. Both Mid-South and Championship Wrestling from Georgia did better ratings than WWF World Championship Wrestling, and Vince McMahon wasn't happy with how things were turning out. McMahon thought he would completely control wrestling on cable television, but he didn't consider for a moment that Turner would simply add more shows to his network. And with the WWF losing viewership and being seen as even more cartoony in comparison to these other wrestling shows on TBS, McMahon decided to give in. All this time, all this fighting, all the deals that had to be made. You could say that Vince McMahon was playing at his own game here, but the problem was Vince was trying to outsmart a network owner, and even right up to the present day, the network is something that Vince McMahon answers to. It's not the other way around. You can't overlook how sweet this must have been for Ole Anderson too, by the way. Not only was he giving the middle finger to Vince McMahon after being left out in the cold, but he was also back to promoting a wrestling show on cable television that more fans wanted to see. So Vince McMahon was now losing viewers, and this meant he was also losing money. Jim Crockett Jr., owner of Charlotte, North Carolina-based Jim Crockett Promotions and NWA president, would end up making a deal with Vince McMahon, a deal that would have huge implications when we consider the evolution of pro wrestling on TV. For $1 million, Vince McMahon would sell the time slot to Crockett. Jim Crockett Promotions, who had similar aspirations to the WWF in terms of going national, had also just purchased Championship Wrestling from Georgia, so this purchase would lead to JCP becoming the dominating wrestling organization on Turner Networks, while also putting the National Wrestling Alliance back at the forefront on TBS. Fans rejoiced as Vince McMahon's wrestlers were taken off the channel and replaced with proper studio wrestling once again. Vince McMahon counted his losses and he moved away from Turner Networks, although his plans for expansion were far from over. McMahon had a big ace up his sleeve, and this sale would help in funding an event that would become the Super Bowl of wrestling, an event that mixed the world of celebrity, music, pop culture, and, of course, pro wrestling. And that event was named WrestleMania. WWF World Championship Wrestling's final show featured a ton of hype for WrestleMania 1, and the final Saturday night WWF show on TBS aired on March 30th, the night before WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden. Crockett took over the following week. So it could be said in a roundabout way that JCP paid for WrestleMania.
Oh my God, here we go.
The Kardashians.
If we jump ahead a bit, when JCP was struggling financially in the late 80s, Ted Turner didn't want to lose pro wrestling on his network, and the steady ratings Jim Crockett Promotions brought in with their version of the World Championship Wrestling show. And so Ted Turner himself would purchase Jim Crockett Promotions, and Turner's new wrestling organization would get renamed to World Championship Wrestling, the same name as the TBS show that had been operated under so many other promoters such as Ole Anderson, Vince McMahon, and Jim Crockett Jr. As for Vince, well, he didn't do too badly in the end. The sale of the time slot helped to further fund WrestleMania, and also McMahon ended up with another time slot on the USA Network. This one was made available for the WWF Primetime Wrestling show. Vince would just have to live with another wrestling company being available to homes with cable television, and having these two companies on separate networks would end up leading to very big things. It was actually a good thing for wrestling viewers at home. The story continued on with the WCW promotion becoming Vince McMahon's biggest ever rival, and in around 7 or 8 years' time after Turner purchased the company, WCW would become a real headache for the WWF when WCW Nitro went head-to-head with WWF Raw on Monday nights. The rather legendary Saturday night time slot would host WCW Saturday Night from 1992 onwards, and by the time Nitro came around, the Saturday night show would get relegated to B-show status. Still, had Vince McMahon not made that Saturday night time slot purchase on TBS, and had the events afterwards not taken place, who knows where we would be today in terms of pro wrestling on television. Although it all ended up as a failure on the WWF's part, Black Saturday in many ways was the origins of the Turner versus McMahon rivalry and the catalyst for the Monday Night War. If McMahon had stayed on TBS and if the WWF produced a show that people wanted to see on Saturday nights, well, you best bet that wrestling in the 90s would have been way different, and the domino effect would bring us to modern wrestling also looking very different. It's all very intriguing, and it leaves us with a lot of what-if scenarios, but what it also shows us is that really anything is possible in the world of wrestling when money is involved. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and take care.
All right, that is the end of the wrestling bios. They talked about Black Saturday. Like I said, it made big references. Like I said, this what kicked off the Monday Night Wars. We know of WWF at the time versus WCW. But yeah, Vince, he definitely had pulled a fast one when he got that time slot, but it ended up working out for him. He ended up later selling it to Jim Crockett Promotions, which was later bought out by WCW. But since it did kick off the whole WCW versus WWE, the thing about it is it was two important things, key components that made WWF a difference. We'll start with WCW first. What were the key factors? NWO was a key factor for WCW because that what helped WCW defeat WWE in the Monday Night Wars for 83 weeks in a row. You know, that's what helped it defeat that, because NWO was a very popular stable, and it still is to this day. Even all these years later, they're still selling merchandise and everything. That's the crazy part about it. And since it is doing that, it's definitely was something WWE was struggling with ratings-wise. Since it was struggling ratings-wise, WWE didn't know what to do at that point. They were struggling, and they even had this is when many superstars were going to jump ship to WCW, and some even joined NWO with the likes of Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall. So that's the thing about that one. But it definitely was, it kept WWE on their feet, you know. But that's the thing, it kept them going. But the thing about it is, WCW still get that respect to this day. It always has for many, many years. There are people, you guys that are listening now, that was really into the NWO. Some of you wasn't. Maybe you was a DX fan. I know I liked NWO, but I like DX as well. But it was a big, big turning point for the Monday Night Wars between both companies. It was a big, very big turning point. WCW is what kept, like I said, WWE on their feet. And there was nothing they had to counteract to WCW what they were doing. Something had to be done. And WWE, they couldn't sit around and not do anything for long. Because had they not done anything, who knows what WWE would be today. Now, don't get me wrong. One thing they did have that was a game changer was WrestleMania. That's what kept WWE. But the thing about it is that WrestleMania was a risk because he started that, like Wrestling Bio said, 1985 after the whole Black Saturday. But he put all his chips and he bet on himself, and it worked. WrestleMania became, like I said, global phenomenon. It became pop culture, and it still been to this day, having the 40th anniversary earlier this year, back in April. So that's the thing. That did keep WWE, but that took years to get there. And WrestleMania had a name at that point. Don't get me wrong, it did. But the thing about it is, it was another key component of WWE that kept them on it, that kept them going. And we all know where I'm about to go with that. And this important component besides WrestleMania is what kept WWE afloat, and it kept them in business and put WCW and the WW and the NWO out of business. Now, besides WrestleMania, what kept WWE? What made them defeat WCW in the Monday Night Wars? There it is, the Attitude Era. The era that still gets talked about to this day. The era that I explained earlier that talks about the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Give me a hell yeah. The Rock, you smelled The Rock is cooking, DX, etc., etc., etc. This is what kept them going. It kept them going many, many times. You know, when we turn on our TV, you know, we saw the great superstars. We saw what they were doing. We all was enjoying as fans. We saw, even though we was going back and forth between WWE and WCW, when you did that, it was just something to remember. I mean, who honestly did not, who missed, who remembers, you know, if you remember around this time, hearing this on your screen.
Give me a hell yeah!
We heard that every Monday, and that's what helped WWE defeat WCW. So this was a big, big component, and that's what made this war so much more between just two brands. But let's see what you guys have to say in the locker room before I get into the interviews. Let's see. Well, you guys got a lot to say. Laverne said, I remember having to choose which to watch sometimes. Yeah, it got like that, but that's not smart marketing. Oh, you talking about what's based on the video. Yep, WrestleMania was a difference. You're right. WrestleMania was a gamble, but it worked. Royal Rumble, that's true. That got big later. All WCW had was good acts. Yeah, but they had the good acts, Laverne, but they didn't create new stars. That's what made the